Welcome, everyone. I'm Jean Marie Procius, co-chair of the 2023 Lit Fest Committee and executive director of the Salem Athenaeum, which is the primary presenter of the Literary Festival in partnership with Salem Public Library. We're thrilled to have you at the kickoff event of the 14th Salem Literary Festival. We hope to see you at more sessions throughout this week. We gained an international and national audience during the pandemic, and we are committed to including virtual sessions now that we can also meet in person once again. Before we begin today's program, we would like to respectfully acknowledge that Salem is on the ancestral territory of the Wampanoag, Nipmuc, Massachusetts, Namkyeg, and Agawam. Many other Indigenous communities have lived and moved through this land over hundreds of years, and many Indigenous people work and live in these regions today. We take this moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the rights and liberation of all Indigenous people worldwide. It is my pleasure to introduce Robert Lambert, who organized this event for you this evening. Robert.
Oh, thank you, Jean Marie. Thank you all for coming. I'm Robert Lambert. I'm a member of the wonderful team of volunteers with Salem Athenaeum and Salem Public Library who bring you this festival each year. I am very pleased to introduce the session in conversation, Paul Tremblay and Grady Hendrix. But before I introduce our authors, I want to give a quick overview of how this will all work. We'll be pasting our anti-harassment policy at the top of the chat, so you know the rules up front. We don't anticipate any problems from all of you book lovers, but we also want to make sure that you know how important it is to us that everyone feels safe. Most of you are Zoom experts at this point, so just a couple quick tips. Please put your questions in the Q&A as we go along, and Paul and Grady will do their best to answer them. Any extraneous comments can be put in the chat, though we appreciate if you keep the chat to a minimum to avoid distracting our authors. If you'd like to use closed captioning, just click on the little box that says CC at the bottom of the screen. And now to introduce our presenters. Paul Tremblay has won the Bram Stoker British Fantasy and Massachusetts Book Awards and is the author of Survivor's Song, Growing Things, The Cabin at the End of the World, Disappearance, Devil's Rock, A Head Full of Ghosts, and crime novels Little Sleep and No Sleep Till Wonderland. His essays and short fiction have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, New York Times, and numerous year's best anthologies. He has a master's degree in mathematics and lives outside of Boston with his family. Grady Hendrix is the New York Times bestselling author of How to Sell a Haunted House, Final Girl Support Group, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, My Best Friend's Exorcism, We Sold Our Souls, and Horror Store. His history of the horror paperback boom of the 70s and 80s, Paperbacks from Hell, won the Stoker Award for Outstanding Achievement in Nonfiction, and he is also the screenwriter of Mohawk 2017 and Satanic Panic 2019. You can learn more facts about him at his website, gradyhendrix.com. Welcome, Paul and Grady. We're all looking forward to your conversation tonight, and we can hand that over to you.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Robert, Jean Marie, and Carolyn. I can see you now, Grady.
Yes, exactly. I am revealed. No, I was just, before we got here, so where are we starting? Are we starting with short stories?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Well, because I was just doing an incredibly hard thing with you. I was sitting in a bar waiting for my cousin to show up, and I was reading The Beast You Are. I take my dust jackets off when I read a book because I'm civilized. Well, that's what you should do. But I don't understand monsters who just like leave it on while they read.
No, so you don't use a flap as a bookmark like I do sometimes? Sorry.
What? You don't wear the skin of your friends as a rain cloak as I do sometimes? That's what I heard when you said that. But I wasn't just reading The Beast You Are, your short story collection. I was reading the actual, finishing the actual prose poem, The Beast You Are.
Thank you.
Dude, what possessed you? It's amazing. I mean, it's like, so the centerpiece of this, and Paul and I have a long-standing, maybe not long, but conversation about, he writes a lot of short stories. I don't, because I can't do them. But his new collection has a very long, how many words, Paul?
30,000.
30,000 word free verse poem about human sacrifice in a small town that's disintegrating over the course of 30 something, 60 years.
Yeah, so yeah, 60 years, yeah.
Except when I say human sacrifice, everyone is an anthropomorphic animal.
Right.
So it's like a Richard Scarry, Shirley Jackson kaiju
Oh, I love
story.
that.
Good,
Thank
yeah.
you.
But dude, what possessed you? It's amazing,
Thank
but
you. Yeah.
it's a lot.
Well, I don't know about, like, I want to ask you this question, like, because I hear a lot of writers sometimes talk about, oh, I'll never be able to write all the books that I have, like, already sort of planned in my head. And I'm like, F you, writer. Like, I go from story to story. Like, I very
Right.
rarely have like backup stories already sort of in my mind. But in this one instance, for the longest time, I'd had a want and a rough idea to do an anthropomorphic animal story. But it was like one of the few times I thought specifically about maybe the market, but more my publisher. I was like, there's no way they would ever, if I wrote this as a novel, they would never publish it. They would never let me do it. So I just kept pushing it like back to the back burner. So when I saw a book deal with the Pallbearers Club, it was 3 books, Pallbearers, a collection, and another novel. And I didn't pitch another collection. That was like a shock to me. I was like, oh, you want another collection? Like, that wasn't a part of any discussion I had with my agent. So I was like, oh, like, I don't know if I have enough stories, but I was like, ooh, somewhere in my head was like, you can write that crazy animal thing as a novella, which is what I did. And I didn't tell my editor that I was doing that. So I turned in the book. She's like, great. Do you have any original stories? I'm like, yes, I do. I have one long novella. Yeah, her response was very funny. It's like, I like it, but I don't know what to do with it. And she didn't edit. I got no edits for that thing from my editor.
Dude, that's like going swimming without a lifeguard. That would terrify me.
Yeah, she turned it over to a copy editor who luckily had a degree in like folklore and stuff like that. So the copy editor was super helpful, and she was more like also like, what she asked me, what are my rules for punctuation for the free verse thing, and I said, I don't know. I will defer to your punctuation rules. Please show me.
Punctuation is the last thing you were concerned with in that.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, since we talked about that novella first, we'll go back to short stories, and let's talk about like anthropomorphic. I have to switch glasses so I can read the scribble.
Yeah.
So we can talk about how about non-human characters. So you had, well, what was the decision? Because I was really surprised by it when I read the book. I wasn't anticipating, when I read Final Girl Support Group at the beginning, there would be a semi-sentient plant in the house.
Fern, yeah,
Fern,
yeah. The fern, the final plant. Yeah. So, and just really quickly, Robert said this already, but if people want to throw in questions as we go, throw them in the Q&A panel, and we will take them as they come. You don't have to wait till the end.
Right.
But one of the things I've learned over the years is that people have really weird relationships with non-human things, items, animals.
Yeah.
And like, we project a lot onto our pets. We project a lot onto our childhood stuffed animals. We like, and so I was like, well, of course, like, someone who's not good in Final Girl Support Group, the lead character is not good at dealing with other people, but she has a plant, and that is her interaction. I mean, I've got non-animate things I talk to on a regular basis. I mean, we all talk to our laptops. We all talk to our cars. If you have a car, like, oh my God, don't fucking stall, man.
Yeah.
Like, don't do this to me. Like, we project personalities onto stuff. And I've always, so you said something a minute ago about how like you go from story to story. I've always had them kind of lined up, and I've run out, which is really kind of a weird place to be.
Like right now, or you mean at Final
like
Girls?
Right
oh, okay.
No, right now. Yeah. But I'd always wanted to write a book that included like how we relate to inanimate objects, like dolls and stuffed animals and puppets. And that was How to Sell a Haunted House.
Right.
But it's also a bit of a cheap shot because, I mean, not a cheap shot, but like in The Beast You Are, I'm looking at Mags, the dog, who's like a dedicated, loyal dog, and she's going out like a champ. And you're like, yeah, go, dog. Like, we're so much more likely to feel, I think, sort of unadulterated, unironic emotions about an animal than we are about a person.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like I didn't go into it thinking about it that way, but I came to the realization, and you might have been at that conversation, that like, if you include animal characters, it's like a nice shortcut to empathy from the reader for that character.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to like maybe do as much scaffolding for like a character that you want, a human character that you want the reader to empathize with. Like
Yeah.
an animal,
Well,
you have no
exactly.
reason. It's a dog, or even like the cat, which in my story doesn't do like very nice things. I still think that many readers are rooting for Meredith.
But that's the thing. Meredith is an asshole and
Yeah.
horrible, not just an asshole, but like a very harmful cat.
Yeah.
I'm a dog person, not a cat person. But I've had cats. I had very close relationships with in my life, and rabbits. But Meredith, like, you still have empathy for her and what she's doing, I think, because she's a cat. You're like,
Yeah.
Like as a person, maybe you're kind of horrible, but as a cat, you're really overachieving.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, I've had mostly dogs throughout my life. Like you have had cats in the past, and I like cats. But I've never come across a cat owner who loves cats and still wouldn't say, "Oh yeah, I could see a cat as a serial killer or a slasher." 100%.
Yeah.
It's not a shot. It's not a surprise.
Yeah,
So,
I think dogs kill smaller animals in their enthusiasm. Cats seem to do it in a more calculated way.
No, for sure. But Pumpkin's not an animal. We're not necessarily supposed to feel empathy for it. Although maybe are we? Like, it's because dolls are creepy, but you do sort of tug on the heartstrings. Like I think every child has experiences. Oh my God, I left, sort of the Toy Story. Oh, I left my favorite toy behind. What's it feeling? What's it thinking?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think those Toy Story movies let Andy off too easy. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to college, just going to put you toys in a box in the attic, or maybe I'll give them to my little son." And the toys are like, "Oh, cool. We're just happy to be played with." And I'm like, these toys are masochists. It's very Velveteen Rabbit. That was a book that really, because you were talking in the book notes for BCR about like Watership Down, which was the book and a movie. I actually didn't see the movie till much later, but the book really wrecked me as a kid.
Yeah.
And Secret of Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, which wrecked me as a kid. And the movie I saw later, but like they're amazing.
Absolutely.
But for me, Velveteen Rabbit was that thing early on that I was like, really hit me hard. But then I think I got angry at it and I started picking at it too much. And like, what you wind up with is like a masochist showroom. Like I'm a toy, please play with me. But if you get tired of me or sick, just burn me in the back garden. Like, what? Where's your sense of self-preservation? So I was very committed to my stuffed animals as a kid. I don't know, were you?
Oh yes. No, I I had a rotation where it was like Monday, this animal got to be in my arms. The rest were positioned around my head to protect me from the dark and boogeyman. And then Tuesday, that one would go back into the head pile, and then the other one I would sleep with. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like the rotation's very important when you're a kid, because it's like I can only focus all my love and attention on one of you at a time. You can't.
And as a kid, there's like a weird power play in that, right? I mean, a sense of power, like, oh, you're the one I'm going to focus on now.
Right.
Like there's a little bit of sadism, childhood sadism in there, I think.
There's a little bit and a little bit of God complex. But I also think it's a really like stuffed animals and pets too, but really more stuffed animals. It's such an important place where you learn to love something that doesn't demonstratively love you back, because I feel like that's a good, I don't have kids, but I feel like those are good training wheels for parenting. Like I know you love me, but you're 13 and 14 and 15, and it's been a while since you've done something nice in this house, but I still love you.
Hey, we have some Q&A. Should we dip into one of those?
Oh yeah.
And we'll go back to short fiction?
Yes. Well, someone's talking about The Puppet That Broke You. Yes, that was what we were just talking about. Film adaptations. Paul, take it, because
well, I mean, we both had one. It both came out like within months, like 6 months of each other. Yeah. So what's the question? We both have had adaptations. What did you think of the adaptations? And if you had to adapt your other works, what would you choose? I wear this, well, I wear the shirt playfully, but also truthfully. I didn't buy the shirt. I'm not that sad and obnoxious. Bookman's in Arizona. Why am I spacing on the town name? I'm still recovering from a concussion, so if I space out like like a Kentucky politician, cut me some slack. Anyway, yeah, so they gave me the t-shirt. Oh, so I mean, I like the movie. I really don't like the ending. But it's kind of fun to think about and talk about the differences between the two. I mean, that sort of like covers in terms of the actual film. I mean, I think it looks great. I think the actors, do an amazing job, and really, I thought got like sort of the emotional core. So on that part, like I was very happy. But like I don't know if you feel similarly, but it's a strange experience. I'm very happy to have gone through it. Hope to go through it again and again. But it is weird that first time seeing this, in this case, this book that I wrote and lived in for like 15 months every day, even when I wasn't writing, but just always thinking about it, then to see it sort of, I never felt like they plucked it out of my head. I felt like I was watching, I don't know, like a stage adaptation where I could identify, oh yeah, this is the book, but it wasn't what I imagined.
Well, it's really different than the book.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's my favorite book of yours, but also I think it's the best movie M. Night Shyamalan's done in a while. But you had a really, I mean, spoiler alert for a movie that's been out. I don't know, grow up. Yeah. That was a general grow up. Like spoilers, who cares? But where the ending, your objection to the ending was a philosophical objection that I agree with, but I think it makes the movie better because it makes it bleaker and more horrible.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if you want to say anything about your interpretation of the ending.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think as a horror movie, 100%. Like for me, that's totally horrifying. I was so bummed out at the end, like, I just couldn't stop thinking about the characters who were left. Like, not only, did they have to choose to kill one of their family members, and that happened. Now they have to live with the knowledge that there's a supreme being, but it's a cruel and whimsical one that'll just fuck with people just for the fun of it. To be like, oh, as a little test. Like, I'm actually really interested in how they go on. Like, how does what's Wen going to be like when she's 20 years old? I would never write a sequel to my novel, but I'd love to write about Wen from the movie, like 20 years later.
Yeah, well, exactly. And it's crazy because also The Beast You Are is about sacrificing, like this human sacrifice idea, which is an idea that's horrible. And it's sort of one of those irreconcilable philosophical conundrums.
Yeah.
Hey, we can live in a world of peace and okayness where planes don't fall out of the sky, but we'd have to kill someone that or care about.
Right.
Which, is horrifying.
But you can't duck. You have to answer that question for my best friend's exorcism. Yeah.
Really? I was just trying to squirm right out of it. No, listen. I had nothing to do with the best friend's exorcism movie. Like, I talked to them a few times. 3 years later, they're like, "We got a movie," and it was fine. It was done during the pandemic. I think they had a lot of restrictions. I thought the actors were all great, but after that, I don't know if you have, Paul, but I made a vow. I'm in on everything I do now. Like, I'm a producer or I'm a writer. So like, How to Sell a Haunted House, Southern Book Club, and Horror Store are all projects that have directors attached and financing in place. And we're on strike right now, so there you go. But I'm the writer on all of those. Like, and at the end of the day, I will get fired and replaced by someone else. But I feel like my job is to sort of be like, this is what it's about. Like, I don't care if you change the genders and times and make it appear, whatever it is you want to do, but the story, the thing that makes the story work is X, this log line. And that, I feel like, is my job to sort of protect that. Are you WGA? Are you writing?
I am not. The book that's sort of closest, Survivor Song, I would be, a producer, but I've had great communication with the director and the screenplay and the screenwriter. So that's been wonderful. Really, like, want my input and stuff like that. So, but similarly, I would like to, if I am fortunate enough to have something else that would be adapted to be, I do want to try writing once, and but I like your attitude.
It's fun.
Writing and then get fired.
So wait, real quick, because I got something I want to ask you that's actually in the Q&A panel. But I just want to say, is that Carol Monda, who's in the Q&A panel, who is the audiobook narrator for We Sold Our Souls? Because she is legendary and amazing and has one of the most incredible narrator voices I've ever heard. So if that's Carol, I'm not going to answer your question because I want to go on to something else, but you're awesome and I'm in awe. If it's not Carol, you have a good name. Anyways, but you were going to say one of the stories in the thing is a treatment for a comic, and you do all this stuff playing with structure and things, which is weird when I think that you haven't done a screenplay for one of your books, because it's just restructuring, and on the one hand just restructuring, on the other hand changes everything. But like, yeah, you play with form way more than I do. Like, you've got way more guts that people will go with you through that story.
Yeah, I don't know if it's guts, but it's just I kind of follow like what interests me. You know, and unlike you've been, you know, working, you know, supporting yourself as a writer for a long time, and so I've always had the safety net of my high school job. And you know, I enjoy teaching, but I also looked at it that way, is like, you know, writing's really hard for me, and like if my heart's not in it, I can't write it. So if I'm going to make the sacrifice of like my free hours, you know, and I try to sacrifice from family and stuff, but like, you know, at some point you still do, like, it has to be something that I would want to read. So I tend to be interested in things that have like different formats or different narrative devices. But again, I always try to think it has to be there for a reason. Like, it can't just be a gimmick.
But do you get bored easily? Like,
no, I think it's more like, honestly, like from a fan's, like so many things spark from my, like, as a reader, as a fan. Like, so The Beast You Are, for example, you know, we already talked about, I love Watership Down, and you know, we talked about Rats and Nim, and there was a book in the early the first decade of the 2000s called Sharp Teeth by Toby Barlow, which is this amazing LA werewolf novel written in free verse. That was part of like, oh, I just want to try that. Like, I read something that I think is cool, and I always think I want to try that, but you know, obviously do it differently in my own way. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, but like, I guess like one of the things also is like, so, and this is a little inside baseball, but you do a lot with structure and stuff and formatting. Like, is that something you have to fight for? Because I know from doing books, like, and this isn't anything against publishers, but like, everything moves down the production conveyor belt at a certain speed. And if you're like, hey, I want interstitials between the chapters, or I want this font, or I want this layout, or I want things to be center justified, you really have to like make a lot of noise for that to happen. So every one of your books looks like a headache to me.
Yeah, no, I definitely broke my editor with the Pallbearers Club. And they sort of broke me a little bit too, because the ebook that was first published
and then
was unreadable. Too. Yeah, unreadable.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, that was an issue.
What? Oh, because of the like annotations and the strike throughs?
They tried to preserve those for an ebook, and they said that they had a solution, and I should have checked. But the solution was to make every page like a static image, but you couldn't. Most Kindles couldn't adjust the size, so they were unreadable. So like, you know, all excited the first day the book is out, and it's like 1-star reviews because you can't read the book. It was less than thrilling, but we got past it. We got through it. Yeah, no, yeah, I don't know. Like the book that's coming out next summer has actually a full screenplay in it. You're talking about writing screenplays.
Like a full 100 pages? Like,
yeah. And it's like purposefully like written as a well, I mean, the format is a screenplay format, like, you know, dialogue, scene, description, all that stuff. But in terms of like the rules of screenwriting, it breaks every rule sort of purposely, because this screenplay was written by 20-year-olds in the, you know, 1993, you know, who were making like an arty, disturbing horror movie, art house disturbing horror movie. And you know, they sort of like, it sort of said going in like, oh, we know this isn't how you're supposed to write a screenplay, but this is how we had to write it for this movie. This movie had to be, you know, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I have messed around with that a little bit. Well, let me ask you, is it hard to jump from, you know, novels to screenplays? Do you think there's any sort of overlap?
Oh,
Especially when you're adapting
right.
your own. Let me ask you that. Like, 'cause
Yeah.
I need to know, like, when you're adapting something like,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, like,
so
350 pages or something. Yeah.
so writing, well, it makes you humble because you're like, oh, I didn't need any of this. Like garbage. What's wrong with you, man? No, writing screenplays has made me a better book writer. Writing books will not help with screenplays at all. But the thing with books that I think is, or books versus screenplays, is books are relentlessly interior. Like, even if you're a third person omniscient narrator, it's someone's point of view. You're picking figurative language. You are, you know what I mean? Your personality is coming through in it. And if it's first person or whatever, or second person, because you're a weirdo and you write stuff in second person, like, you know, like, but like you, it's very much interior. And so much of books is emotion and feelings and what you feel about what the character feels about what's happening. Screenplays is all exterior. You know, I learned that lesson very hard when I did the adaptation of Horror Store, my haunted IKEA book, because I realized that the two things you can't show on screen are someone thinking and someone changing their mind. Like, you can show what they do, but you can't show those. And the big two moments in Horror Store is someone reflecting on their terrible life, and then them deciding, changing their mind to do something different. And so not being able to do those two things, it's a radically different movie than it was a book. But the economy it taught me, like in terms of like if you read Horror Store, there's scenes of people, sometimes just one person in a car driving somewhere. Like something, by the time I get to Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, if people are in a car going somewhere, they are arguing or talking about something that brings them into conflict, and they are either really looking forward to or really not looking forward to where they're going. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, like I see comics do this a lot, which is like two characters walking down a hall talking and delivering exposition and plot, and you're like, it's a comic. Can't they be in free fall in the higher atmosphere? Like, why are you showing me two characters walking down a hall talking? It's really boring. And screenplays sort of taught me that
that's the
nothing can be boring.
The Law and Order comic that you're reading again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny when you look at Law and Order. It's interesting. Everyone's always arguing, or it's a really short scene to deliver a bit of exposition, and it's like Mariska Hargitay will be like, you mean like that cult? And then Ice-T will be like, the one from California that we just busted last month. You know what I mean? And then the scene's over like 2 lines later.
One more screenplay thing, just for my benefit, and then we'll go back to books and stuff. Sorry, everybody. Now that I've dipped my toe in barely, so I've read a bunch of screenplays. I did write a screenplay for a short story, just like for practice. So I've done some of it, but part of it I know is just like the writer who likes to play with form, but also part of it is the inner knee jerk, wants to go against everything. I don't know, like the whole 3-act structure thing, like really annoys me. That for a major or for a studio movie, it has to fit like this 3-act structures. Like, have you not seen Asian cinema or European movies for that matter? Like, not everything has to be in a 3-act. I don't know. That's just,
but something that really messed me up for a long time was I'm a huge Hong Kong film buff. Like, I went to the last Chinatown theater in North America because it was cheap and university.
You just hosted a festival of some sort.
And just hosted, and like moved to Hong Kong, lived there for about a year and a half, slightly short of 2 years, because I loved the movie so much in the 90s, and ran an Asian film festival in the US for like 16 years. Wow. So but one of the things that really messed me up is Hong Kong movies are very much like Return of the Living Dead. I don't know if you remember it very well. Where it's like the genre is not this genre, or it's not horror where everything, it's like it starts out funny, but as things get more serious, the tone of the movie gets darker. Hong Kong movies are very much like, hey, we're going to have a funny scene next to a romantic scene, next to a really violent scene, next to sort of a horrific thing. And so this sort of, they ignore a lot of genre rules we take for granted. but that is not what people want to see in a movie. You know what I mean? Like they want to see something that toes the line. 3-act structure, though, I feel like you're just telling a story, and the middle is always the tough part. Like, you know, like, so I feel like the more you ignore it, the better, but you have to be aware the middle's the hard part, you know?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's how I write. I usually know the beginning and the end, and then I have to make up the middle. That's
well, someone asked
interesting.
in the Q&A part, though, about endings. Yeah, I got to know the ending before I can write a book.
Oh, yeah. I'm looking up, speaking of endings, yes. It depends. I mean, I usually have a notion of the ending. Like sometimes I, like with the Paul Bearers Club, I knew the last line, but I didn't know like what it took to get to that last line.
Right.
So sometimes like I have a vague notion. In Calamity in the World, I had a vague notion. But there's always a notion. Like I've never started something like I have no idea how this is going to end. I can't work that way.
But see, okay, so this is where I think I'm going to deviate. You're a big music fan, and especially punk. And like, I always feel like I want to aspire to doing what a song does with a book, right? Like it's short, it's sharp. You're like surprised by the language. It's very economical, and it really gets you there. Like I've cried reading books. Have you cried reading books?
Yes.
Yeah, but I've cried more listening to songs.
Same.
And granted, there's a time difference, like 4 minutes, 23 seconds versus like 323 pages. But like, there are songs I will listen to for the rest of my life until I can't count the number of times. There's books I've read 4 or 5 times, probably not much more than that. But like, songs really slot you into this emotional journey. And I feel like the resolve, the end, like landing that thing, like Paul Bearers Club, which I really like, is a shaggy book of yours, right? It's not super plot. It's more of a coming of age, taking place over many years. But then you stick that ending hard. And I feel like that's really for music.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way. Well, thank you.
But you knew the ending from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, the vague notion. Yeah. And, you know, sometimes the ending changes, but that's usually how it is. But it was funny. So you talk about like seeing relation from my music to my writing. I was gonna say, hearing you talk about Hong Kong cinema, like I immediately thought about how because I had a question written down here about your use of horror and humor and sort of different genre aspects that crop in your book. It makes total sense to me now.
Yeah.
I think
but also,
many books are structured maybe like some of those genreless movies.
100%. I mean, I just take it serious, something ridiculous, and I take it seriously until I'm like crying as I write the line, and everyone's like, that was funny. But also the other part of that is that I feel like you have to take what you're doing super seriously and sort of ignore, like you've got to be aware of what other people are doing in the genre, but kind of ignore it also because some of it's busted. Like vampires, a little tired. Like when I tried to Soul Southern Book Club, my publisher told me, write it. And then 6 weeks later, like sales and marketing is like, who cares about vampires? And I had to put it off for a book, you know, like I had to wait. But you've got to figure out these things that make it, I think, interesting and resonant for you, for other people.
Absolutely. Oh, shoot. I had something really cool to add to that. Now it's gone. Oh, man.
We're getting older.
Oh, sorry, really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
I would say, like, one thing I've noticed that has changed for me is, like, my earliest horror novels, well, actually, my earliest novels, even like the detective ones and A Head Full of Ghosts, and probably even Devil's Rock, for those, like, I read and watched everything while I was writing that book that was close to that book, whether it was like stuff online or books or movies, especially with A Head Full of Ghosts. But now that I'm, you know, I've written more books and getting older, I found myself doing the avoiding things, like, you know, I just want to, or look for not horror connections or read things that aren't horror, but I think might, that might sort of influence or inform the book that I'm writing. So that's weird.
Right.
I hadn't noticed that until you started talking about that now.
But, you know, that's something I think, so, okay, this is a really boring thought process, but bear with me. So one of those things you hear a lot. I never really experienced it because I didn't go to a lot of creative writing classes in university or wherever, but I know people have. Is this idea that you aren't allowed to write genre, right? You're in a creative writing class,
Right.
you're not allowed to write genre. And I went to Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop in 2009, which was life-changing. But you were reading a lot of sci-fi just on your own, or fantasy on your own, but you were also writing it and talking about other people. And you realize that sometimes these concepts, like thinking through these concepts, it did take up a lot of brain space.
Mhm.
And I noticed that over the 6 weeks of Clarion, people's stories reined in the big ideas. And they were more like, how do I get a character from the living room to the kitchen in a believable manner? Or how do I get a character to go from I hate you to I like you in 3,000 words or 5,000 words or 7,000 words? Like, and people are really leaving the sci-fi and fantasy and the genre element aside while they tried to figure out these basics of like, how do I depict this human behavior on the page? And listen, I would never advocate for someone saying don't write genre, because I think you write what you write. You want to write what's fun for you. You want to write where your sweet spot is. But I also think that there is this feeling of, and I think you have it definitely, you look at Cabin at the End of the World, or definitely Head Full of Ghosts, or Pallbearers Club. What was it like to be in high school? What was it like to have this best friend? What's it like to have this emotional process? And there's a genre element on top of it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that as we get older, because we are, like those human things become more important than the genre things. And the genre things are important, but they're not our ends. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think I've always had interesting characters, but I will say like one of the most, Clarion was life-changing for you. A life-changing thing for me as an early young writer was when I first started writing, I was like, everything's a horror story. Everything I'm writing is a horror story. And I wrote this short story. It was published like online in the early 2000s. And a writer I really respected read it. It's like, oh, this was a great story. And then he said, which I wasn't expecting, it would have been good even without the horror element. And that sort of like rocked me back. I was like, oh, what? Huh. And so, I don't know, for me, I was like, okay, I'm a writer who writes horror. I'm not a horror writer. And to me, that was an important idea just to, it might sound trite, but like the idea that like, no, like the story comes first. Like if the story ends up being like a weird detective novel instead of a horror novel, because I tried to make Little Sleep, I think initially a horror novel. No, it needs to be what it is. My interests are going to go sort of horror or horror adjacent anyway. So like, there's no need to force it. And I'm lucky, like I'm sure you are too with your publisher. They give me a pretty wide, a wide definition of what could be horror, what could be, dark fiction or whatever you want to call it.
But it's also funny, like what you're saying, there is this idea that like the horror elements I don't find them separate from the story. I just sort of like I want to write about the world that's around me and people that I see, not people on another planet or in the future or in a secondary world. And this is something Stephen, who we both know, says a lot, like, and you don't want it to be boring. So then you kind of literalize your metaphors and you wind up in horror.
Change class. That's a great segue, because I definitely wanted to ask you, we could both talk about this. Talking about how much autobiography sort of sneaks into our fiction, or
I know.
Because we're sort of talking around it right now a little bit. And you actually, I'm stealing your questions. You wrote, have either of us gotten in trouble doing that? I think that's kind of what's too, then the question of what's too far. Is there no such thing as too
have
far?
You gotten in trouble?
No, no, I don't know what trouble is. Maybe like I definitely had to forewarn. Is that a word? I had to pre-warn my mom about the Pallbearers Club, telling her, hey, there's a character that's very much like you, and she doesn't come to a good end.
Oh right, yeah.
But no, my parents have been great about it. Like, I know I know it is a very strange experience for my siblings and close family members. They're going to read the books much differently than anybody else, because like, I couldn't see anybody else. But like, my brother was convinced that the Head Full of Ghosts dad is our dad. I gave the Head Full of Ghosts dad like his employment background and some of the religious stuff, but like my dad is not a jerk. I love my dad. So yeah, like it's kind of funny. It's like, I don't know how you feel, but like I just get into writer mode. I'm like, oh yeah, I start off with like maybe some pieces of information that are similar to people that I know, but that character very quickly in my head becomes somebody totally different.
Yeah.
But I can
Oh,
see
exactly.
other people having not seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah, every character in my books is someone I know. I mean, it may be
Right.
on the subway, it may
Sure.
be someone I know in all my life. No one has ever recognized themselves by the time I'm done doing whatever. But you need a starting place. You need to get like, it's like safe cracking. You need to get that like wedge in there. You need that chink in the steel to. But also, I have had people with absolute certainty be like, this character in your story is this person,
Yeah.
or this is based on that. And never once have they been right, ever. They're always wrong.
Right. And I would say, is that more prevalent with the South Carolina novels? I can't remember if Horror Story takes place in South Carolina, but you have
No, it's
3 other
Ohio.
ones, right? Yeah.
Yeah. No, but any of them, like people are like, oh, like this is based on, like my sister was like, oh, this is so based on what happened. And she sent me this email. There was this long story from our childhood. I'd never heard this story before. Like, do you know what I mean? It was like, but she was convinced that the story she was telling me for the first time was informative. It had informed the book. And it just never does. Like every one that goes through our heads gets mutated and weirded out and off.
So that was definitely the case up until Paul Bear's Club. I mean, it still gets weirded out, but that was so autobiographical and like purposefully so. Because I was riffing on the idea that this was a found memoir. So I really put a ton of really all the high school stuff. Once Art gets to college and drops out, I never did that. I was a little worried, like, oh man, like I feel like I emptied the bucket, like because so many of my stories, even if they don't seem autobiographical, as you said, they come from something that I know because I'm a terrible researcher. So I was really worried after Paul Bear is like, oh no, like I don't know if I have any more novels left in me. I think I used it all, but luckily.
Oh, I know. I'm in the same. Yeah, I'm in the same place. Like I've got a book coming out next summer that's about a home for unwed mothers in 1970 when that was a thing. I have 2 relatives who I knew very well who were sent away, as the term was. After that, I'm like, what? Like I've eaten it all. Like I've cannibalized my corpse. There is no meat on these bones anymore. What am I going to write about after that? Like something will come, but
but like you've had like this amazing life where like I didn't even realize I forgot that you lived in China for a year and a half and that you some of the puppet stuff is like you were a part of this.
I wasn't
ultra leftist puppet
socialist
thing. It's like I don't think you're going to run out of everything, Grady. I think you're going to.
I don't. Okay. Yeah, but also at the same time, you look at someone like you look at a Stephen King or. I mean, I guess a VC Andrews also, like she's always extrapolating from her own family, but like, or Shirley Jackson, like, these writers we sort of see, like, they make it work for many books.
Yeah, no, like I've written about kids and parents so often. It's like, but now like my oldest just graduated college. My youngest just went off to college. I'm like, am I going to write like empty nest horror? Does anyone know how to read that?
We're just all alone.
Yeah. We should probably jump into
someone was asking. No, someone was asking in the chat about killing characters and like, is that a problem? And so I don't know because I don't kill my characters. Like I really like them a lot. I hang out with them for 10 months to a year. Paul does horrible things to his characters. And I don't know, are you just not happy? Or there not enough hugs?
Not enough hugs. That was my wife, Lisa, her note on A Head Full of Ghosts was the mom has to hug the kids more. And I said, I'm not doing that. And she said, well, I'm done reading your books.
Whoa. Holy cow.
She was an English major, so she read like all my early stuff and was very helpful. So she put in more than enough time in the much lower level Tremblay stuff.
Did she really stop reading your stuff?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
She may go back to it. She watched the movie, and I had to tell her what the book was too. But also like her having kids actually changed both of us. She introduced me to Stephen King. So I mean, Lisa was a horror fan.
Right.
But once we had children, she couldn't watch things with kids in danger anymore. I mean, she eventually got over it because she loves Game of Thrones and watched like The Walking Dead much longer than I watched it.
Game of
Like-
Thrones is nothing but children in danger. Yeah.
But like when I had kids, instantly all those anxieties went into my writing. And like I didn't even notice. I had someone point out, I was like, you know, you write about parents and kids a lot. I'm like, ooh, I didn't notice. I mean, obviously I noticed that by the time Head Full of Ghosts rolled around. But in terms of, I mean, I take it sort of seriously. I don't know. Like I don't think, oh boy, I'm gonna kill this character. It's like, but I also don't get too emotionally attached in the act of writing necessarily, which might sound weird because I just feel like I'm just so close to the gears of seeing like how things fit and what they do. I have gotten emotional, which maybe sounds weird, like at a couple of the books, like after having turned it in and not read it for a few months, and then I get sent the copy at. It's like reading the end of Disappearance of Devil's Rock for the first time when it was all edited. That actually got to me because it was so upsetting. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, for me, it's always like doing the rewrites, and I'll do them on the early drafts as they go in. Because usually what happens is I turn in a book and my editor's like, are you kidding me? And then I have to do like a radical rewrite to like save it. So it's usually that rewrite. And you're right, it's not until the copy edit rewrite where it feels like things kind of land, and you're like, oh my God, these poor kids or these poor whoever, like, why does it have to happen to them? Who's the jerk who decided this was going to happen? You get a little distance. Yeah, no, so I'm always, I agree with you. Sorry, I'm looking through the Q&A. Oh, wait, sorry. I want to ask something really quickly though, as you look through the Q&A, because we have a connection that I didn't realize we had till I was reading the author notes from The Beast You Are. Giant monsters. Love giant monsters. So yeah, you've written more. I can't write about the end of the world. I can't. It's too much. I'm a zombie guy. Like I'm an apocalypse zombie guy in terms of my consumption. I like zombie movies. I like zombie books. It's the end of the world and people are living in an elementary school where the windows have barbed wire over them. I'm all in. But I can't write it. Yeah. And you've done a lot of stories and books about pandemic and apocalypse and end of the world and all that. But to me, a giant monster is the ultimate end of the world, right? It's just a literal sentient being just saying, yeah, like, done. I'm sick of you. So yeah, bring me your end of the world stuff.
I'm sort of the opposite. Like I have a really hard time watching end of the world stuff or consuming it.
Really?
Especially if it's like very realistic. So I mean, zombies I'm okay with, but like if I will never watch
Contagion
Threads Contagion. I wouldn't
really.
Yeah, but
I'll
write about it sometimes.
Yeah,
but even I would say the Camp of the End of the World. I don't know if the world is ending or not. Like that's not like 100% clear. I could sort of like
Shyamalan has an opinion. He'd like to share.
Does have an opinion. And actually Survivor Song was fine when I wrote it. Like I sort of wrote it with the idea that like, hey, no, this is not the end of the world. Like things are crappy for a while, but like that was written before COVID. And then when it was released afterwards, it was really interesting to see people respond to it by like, oh, it's a worldwide pandemic. I'm like, no, it's just in Massachusetts.
Oh, see, my impression from Survivor Comics, it was very limited. It was like not even all of Massachusetts, but it was still
it still
how
plays
much stuff
with,
you got on the
All right.
No, but like giant monsters. So wait, but you will watch giant monsters. You won't watch
because that's not real. I mean, that's not a realistic threat.
You don't know that. There might be a Loch Ness
That's
monster.
true. I mean, like, I don't think maybe there is, but I don't think Loch Ness is going to come out and just like destroy the world. I could be wrong. Maybe.
You seem very comfortable in your
so how about, are you going to write a kaiju? Where is Grady Hendrix kaiju novel?
I love kaiju. I like it. I love consuming that. Those Heisei Gamera movies from the 90s where it's like, shooting giant monsters taking down Tokyo from the human civilian point of view. It's amazing. But I don't know if I have it in me. Like, I wish I did. Sea monsters are the things I'm really scared of. Like giant underwater leviathans. Traumatizing. I don't know if I can do it. Can stare into the heart of the sun.
You got to do it. Let's see. How about this one? As authors, you both have different relationships with the idea of ambiguity. I'd love to hear both of you talk about towing the line between the idea of being transparent about the reality of the horror you create.
Paul, Mr. Paul Ambiguous Tremblay. Would you like to start?
Well,
this
Survivor
one off?
Song was not. Yeah. Well, so
And
like-
Cabin at the End of the World, I did not think was ambiguous.
no. Yeah.
No, do people think that's ambiguous?
Some do. Yeah. I've had some people say, oh, the world was definitely not ending. They were crazy. And there were plenty of people say, oh no, it's definitely the world is ending. We want to know what happens next. So I'm sure in Clarion, they never told you write what you know, right? But I think, but write your obsessions is great writing advice, right? Where you know is terrible advice, even though, anyway. I'm clearly obsessed with the idea of not knowing of ambiguity and like how it relates to like our everyday lives and like how our memories and even our identity and even our everyday lives are a lot more sort of unsure footing than we like to think they are. But
Yeah.
if I'm going to write a story with ambiguity in it, I really try hard not to make it seem like a Twilight Zone sort of twist at the end. It has to be part and parcel of the theme of the story. It has to be why the story is a horror story.
Right.
And if it's not, then I failed.
But okay. So when you're saying like ambiguity is part and parcel, but of course it is. We're writing about people in situations. Like half of Cabin at the End of the World, 2/3 of Survivor Song not Survivor Song, Paul Bearer's Club, are people trying to come to grips with what's going on because it's so outside their experience, so unbelievable. You see a ghost, do you really think anyone's gonna go, oh yeah, you saw a ghost, that's cool? Like, you know what I mean? I've done that trick where people are like, oh yeah, you saw a ghost or your friend's possessed or whatever, and they immediately accept it. And that's so alien to the genre that it feels different and fresh. But ultimately, most ghost stories, Turn of the Screw, Haunting of Hill House, so much of them are about if you're being confronted with something that's so outside your experience as a human being, are you crazy? Is it real? So I feel like the ambiguity is baked into the genre, yeah,
absolutely.
It's not like you're somehow a weirdly ambiguous writer. Horror is a genre where you have to overcome two problems. Why don't they leave? And why do they believe this is true?
Right.
And
sort of like, it's not an ambiguous novel, but one of the things I really loved about How to Sell a Haunted House was how long it took before like something overtly horror showed up. Like so much time.
I was so worried about that.
No, I love that. I thought, because obviously she's in the house, she can see sort of the creepy dolls, and I don't know. I think it's kind of fun. Like you and I are both at a stage where, we're not going to assume everyone who picks up our book has read all our books, but there are readers. I do like thinking about those readers sometimes because like, oh, some of these people have an expectation. Like Grady Hendrix readers knows something really awful is going to happen with these dolls. But like the idea
says
of
horror on the spine.
But yeah, it was a brilliant example of sort of what Hitchcock said, like, suspense is the bomb under the unexploded bomb under the table. You know what's there kind of thing. Anyway. Yeah.
No, which I appreciate, but also like, it is one of those things too, where I feel in horror, you have to be really careful that the stakes don't run away with you. You know what I mean? Everyone's seen everything at this point, probably in a movie. And, and it's like, okay, if I don't want to show my characters getting grotesquely mutilated and horrible things happening to them, I have to get you so invested in that character that them losing a fingernail or a finger or an arm is going to be upsetting. And so you got to establish that stuff, but it's hard because you're like, here's 80 pages of a book where nothing monstrous happens. And I just hope my tap dancing appeals to you with this character.
Right. No, I thought it was wonderful. And then especially have the appearance of Pupkin and then go to the past with all the wild leftist puppetry stuff. Anyway.
Wait. So jump back because I actually haven't asked you this. And what's the next book? I know it's got a screenplay inside of it, but
So the next book is called Horror Movie, a Novel. So
that is
it's
so Googleable.
yes, it's so I mean it has sort of like the setup we've seen before. There's been so many like horror movie novels out recently. Like if I'd thought more about what was happening, maybe I wouldn't have written it. But anyway, you know, it takes a step
Like
like, oh, here was well, I mean, this year alone there was like Sylvia's book, Josh Winning's book, a few other books about like, you know, old cursed movies potentially. So in this one, it's really presented almost as the audio book of a character who was in this 1993 movie called Horror Movie, and it was made by, you know, some 20 somethings, very very Gen X, very art house, disturbing horror movie. You know, it got filmed, but because of something happened at the very end, it never got to screen, kind of thing. And now 30 years later, they want to reboot it, and he's really the only person left alive from the main, because there's only like 5 people in the movie. But you know, the rest of them just died because, hey, it's, you know, you're in your 50s, people die. You know what? It's not like, oh, this one like killed himself, and this one did this, and this one, you know. So there's that part of it. I'm doing a terrible job pitching this as an elevator pitch, but it bounces back and forth between him talking about his experience on set, him talking about the experience of rebooting it, you know, cut back, you know, cut through with the actual screenplay of the movie. And yeah, so it's kind of like, it's definitely, I think it's, you know, as close to as disturbing as Cabin in some ways. I find it really disturbing.
Yeah.
But it's also mixed with a little Hollywood tell-all humor. There's definitely, my parents and family members won't be saying, hey, was that me? But maybe some Hollywood types might read the book and be like, hey, was that me?
But I do think there's an interesting thing where it's like this idea that a movie, you know, you're preserving a moment in time, and it might not be the right moment, you know, like it might be a terrible moment.
Yeah. Actually, I sent the book to brilliant reviewer Walter Chow. He reviews for Film Threat. Central, what the hell is it? But he reviews.
I
all
think
over
it's
the place.
Film Central these days. Yeah.
So it was actually a conversation during the pandemic. Walter did a bunch of like Saturday matinees, and he invited like amazing people to talk about the movie that they were showing for an hour. And it was him and John Darnielle talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And that was like the first breadcrumb that led me down into a wormhole that sort of became the movie. So yeah, I felt it was important. I wanted to ask Walter, and he gave me a really nice blurb, which was cool. How about your book coming next year?
Wait, sorry, were you a Film Threat reader?
I started, our friend Steven turned me on to Walter's stuff. At first he was like, hey, you should watch this, you know, these YouTube videos. And once I watched him, you know, he's such a brilliant guy. I started reading all his reviews and stuff. His review for the Cabin at the End of the World is, Knock at the Cabin, sorry. Scathing 1-star review. He loved the book though.
Yeah, oh well, there you go. Yeah, so speaks the t-shirt. No, but also that's the thing, like I feel like 90s horror, there was this feeling of like all bets are off. Like, you know what I mean? We don't need, like the 80s were very much hung up on the teen slasher craze, and also like the old school formula. We need a star, we need a, you know, and in the 90s, I felt like it started being like all bets are off, and it culminating in the Blair Witch Project, you know, like this idea that like, it doesn't have to look like anything. Like, which, I always remember Film Threat did a big story. God, it was like,
it's not Film Threat, Film Freak. Oh, shoot.
Oh, Film Freak. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway.
But Film Threat was around, and like they did this big story on this movie called Darkness. This dude shot on 8mm film, and it was a giant, epic, apocalyptic vampire movie with hundreds of extras that he shot in like, you know, his hometown of, you know, somewhere in Kansas, and just getting, and it's like, it looked great. I mean, I've seen it since then. It's great. But it's like, he never made anything else. He just made this one movie, you know? And I don't know, I feel like there's this weird legacy of horror where it's crazy. There's an element of crazy people taking big chances and big swings that never sort of reach the mainstream because they're too weird. Their distribution's too small. They don't have a producer on board who, you know, and you think about that with books, you know, and it's like, there are those books in horror. I mean, I guess they exist in literary fiction. I guess they exist in other places. But I feel like horror is the sweet spot. Things like, Let's Go Play at the Adams or The Girl Next Door.
Mhm.
Books that aren't massive hits when they come out, but they sort of, The Auctioneer by Joan Sampson, they sort of
Right.
seep in through the underground water,
I mean, the other fun part of horror for me is like, anytime you do a horror story in some way, you are in conversation with everything that came
Yeah.
before it.
No, exactly.
If you're not, then you probably did something wrong. Like, 'cause as you
Right.
said, like the characters are going to have experienced, whether or not they're horror fans, they're going to know.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, and that conversation is, I don't know, I find it nice. Like,
Yeah.
write, and like, I would love to write a Frankenstein thing because it'd be really nice to sort of go back and forth with Mary Shelley. She's a
Absolutely.
cool goth teenager.
Well, how about your book? I don't know if it's coming out next year, but you're just finished.
Yeah,
edits
next
for it?
year,
Yeah.
next summer, unless I just turned in the new draft. So I turned in a draft in May and my editor was like, no. So I just turned in the new radically rewritten draft on Friday, last Friday. So I hope it works, but it's changed a lot, but it's sort of the elevator pitches is sort of a Rosemary's Baby set at a home for unwed mothers in 1970. And this is where you and I were talking our personal lives. Like, I have an aunt and a great aunt who are both sent away, as the saying goes.
Oh, wow.
And I've always wanted to write something about that because I think there's something so wild. You're 15 or 16 years old, you're pregnant,
Yeah.
you haven't gotten a lot of sex education, it's 1970, it's all pre-Roe. And go here and you'll be here for 6 months and then you'll pretend that never happened. And both my aunt, my great aunt, they never talked about that until they were in their 60s or 70s. My mom, she's my aunt's little sister. Like, she had no idea her sister had been sent away to have a baby. And my mom was 14 at the time, until like they were in their late 60s, early 70s. And that's so wild. It's so crazy. So it's a whole witchcraft thing around there, but it's just, you think of these houses all over the place with like teenage girls waiting to have this baby. And then your life got edited. These 8 or 9 or 6 months, whatever it is, they don't exist, don't happen. Like, but you had a kid, like, in that like, it's such a weird thing. And I also want to just acknowledge that as a childless middle-aged man, I am the last person who should be writing a book where every character is pregnant. But I've got a lot of OBs on board. I've got a lot of mom, like, trying to do my research.
All right. Well, it's 8:06. I maybe 4 more minutes.
Okay,
I do want to. I'm sorry, we're not going to get to everybody's questions, but I did want to ask you, since we opened to talking about my short story collection, short stories. You've talked. We've talked, and you've said. I know you've said it in public too. You don't write a lot of short stories.
I'm terrible at it.
But you have one coming out in a few weeks.
As do you, sir.
Yeah, but let's talk about how did it feel writing a short story? Like,
well, so it's this Amazon thing, Creature Feature, that's coming out. So it's you, me, Joe Hill. Who are the other 2 people?
Josh Mallerman, also Jason Mott.
There's a 6.
And Chandler. Hers the only one I'm on. Hers is the only one I haven't read. Like, I haven't read her stuff before. I'm so sorry, I'm forgetting her name. But Chandler's her first name. I still have a concussion, so that's my excuse for everything. So
exactly, I have no concussion. My excuse is that
so there are
pay
6
attention
stories.
to other people. No, but like, when someone asks you and pays you to write something, you're like, well, this is what I should be able to do, because also genre all comes out of that pulp tradition, right? Where it's like, I should be able to write according to what the market wants. And I was like, okay, what do I do? What's a monster thing I've always wanted to write? And you have a really good point, which is that, there are a lot of book ideas that might just be better as short stories, and like, why not do them that way? Maybe it's a long short story, but why not? Like, do them, have them out there. And so that's what I'm trying to. So mine, I used to be terrified, and maybe it's because I saw Pet Cemetery when I was young, but someone grabbing your ankle
Oh, sure.
from
Yeah.
under the bed. So I did an ankle snatcher because I was also like, so what's grabbing your ankle? And then I was like, oh, it's just hands. It's just hands and hands and hands and hands. It's a lot of hands. But also, like, if there's some monster under your bed, like, it's gonna kill people. There's gonna be a criminal justice profile. Like, someone's gonna go to prison for those murders. Like,
Yeah.
so I just tried to keep extrapolating out. What's your story?
I love it. Yeah, like they pitched it to us to me it was pitched as you have to use a trope or like a famous monster of some sort.
No, that's what they said. Yeah.
So like I don't want to say what my monster is without giving it away too much, but I will say it's a monster from a famous 50s B movie. But it takes place on Cape Cod and it bounces back and forth between 1986 and present day. John Langan is a character. Like, so I definitely did put John into a story. Like, he can read this and say, "Oh yeah, that's you." Except I named him.
You already did House of Windows.
Yeah, well, his character is Jimmy Lang. Is his character in this book. So there's a journalist investigating sort of what's happening in real life on the Cape with toxic algae blooms, both in the salt water and the fresh water, not only due to the rising temperatures, but due to all to the phosphorus and nitrates that are sort of being pumped out of septic systems, etc.
Is this the Blob?
Maybe, yeah. So a blob-esque riff, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
because those of you, the Blob's such a it's hard to do Bigfoot these days. Like, it's a feral animal that maybe is wiser than us and has beautiful eyes, but like it kills people also. But like the Blob is like, here's something coming for you that's no shape, no form. Its whole function is to just absorb. And that feels very familiar now, these days.
Sure. Yeah. So no, yeah, I'm happy. I mean, so were you happy with your story? Like, were you like, okay, that wasn't so bad. I'll write a short story. I'll give that a go again.
Yeah, I'm trying to, but I get to the end of a short story and I'm like, it feels either as hard as a book. And then I'm like, what's the point? I'm getting paid so much less than a book. Or it feels like, well, that just kind of came and it was good. I enjoyed writing it, but if I enjoyed writing it, it can't be good. I'm a Presbyterian man. We're racked with guilt.
Same.
If something was pleasurable, it must be bad.
Maybe that's a good spot to end. Remember, everybody, if it's pleasurable, it is bad.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
We'll bring Robert back in, I guess, right? Yeah.
Good to see you, sir.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you both so much, Paul and Grady. And thank you for being a part of Salem Lit Fest 2023. A big shout out to our sponsors, supporters, and partners who help keep Lit Fest free. They are the Salem Athenaeum, Salem Public Library, Salem Cultural Council, Peabody Essex Museum, Wicked Good Books, Salem 5, Copper Dog Books, Cinema Salem, Salem Academy Charter School, the House of Seven Gables, Salem Maritime National Historic Site, Essex National Heritage, Theater in the Open, and to all of the readers like you who are donating to the festival. Finally, thanks to our audience for being here, for asking great questions and supporting these authors. Buy their books. If you are so inclined, you can purchase our authors' books at our sponsor, Wicked Good Books in Salem, Copper Dog Books in Beverly, or from your favorite booksellers. Our next event is One Book, One Salem with Angie Cruz, author of How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. That event is in person at Salem Academy Charter School, 45 Congress Street in downtown Salem, and that is at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Additionally, we have many wonderful sessions scheduled for each day this week, and we hope you can join us. For a full list of sessions, please visit us at salemlitfest.org, or you can see the chat that Carolyn dropped in where you can register for sessions. All right, great. Well, thank you again, Paul and Grady. That was wonderful.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.